Hi, I'm Mark Madison, the historian at the National Conservation Training Center, and today we're very fortunate to have two authors with us, two distinguished authors who came all the way from Alaska to share their new book. We have Christine Cunningham and Steve Meyer, and their book is called The Land We Share, a love affair told in hunting stories. Love the book. We are so appreciative of you coming all this distance down here. And this is just a little added bonus content to your presentation later this evening, which will also be attached to this. So my first question is, Christine, you're a lifelong Alaskan. What changes have you seen over the years in Alaska, and what brought you to hunting?
I didn't start hunting until I was an adult. I was about 27 years old and always spent a lot of time outdoors, but definitely seeing it as a hunter and being a participant instead of just an observer kind of got me out of my head and more into my body as a hunter, and definitely started noticing things differently in the wild, and in particular the population and changes over time. Steve and I are in the alpine a lot. We hunt ptarmigan. There's 3 different types in Alaska. So the whitetail ptarmigan in particular are pretty vulnerable to climate change because they're in the alpine. In Alaska, they're not very studied. So it's I'm particularly keen on how they're doing year round. They're tough little birds, but we've seen with people being in the outdoors so much more, it's like they keep getting pushed further back. So just kind of what I know is more like what's going on in like my home range with the animals and how they're impacted.
Great. Steve, you came to hunting a little younger. Tell us when you started.
Yeah. I was 5 years old. I, kind of like Christine, I insisted that I be taken hunting because from childhood, my dad hunted, his friends hunted with him, and so I just always wanted to go. Mostly because I just always wanted to go. I didn't really care about shooting, and obviously I didn't carry a gun that early, but they took me, and that was the start of it. Nothing's really changed since.
Tell us about the first time you came to a National Wildlife Refuge, because we're very parochial.
Yeah. So when I say I started hunting with them, I didn't carry a gun, but I did everything else, including I learned to take care of birds that were taken, learned how to skin deer, all those things. That was part of my passage into real hunting. And so by the time I was about 8 years old, I was a pretty responsible kid. I knew the regulations, I knew all those things. And so my dad gave me my first rifle. It was a Winchester. And when he did, he said, I'm going to take you someplace. I'm going to show you something. And about a half a mile from our farm, there was a cattail slough. And I think he saved this for me because we walked out this slough, and beside it there was a signpost, and on that signpost was a white sign with blue lettering, and it said National Wildlife Refuge System. And across the front of it there was this big blue goose. And my dad pointed to that sign. He said, if you respect this place, if you take care of this place, it'll always be here for you. It'll always be a place where you can come. And he said this, get away from your mother. I was that kid. I just didn't want to be in the house. And so I like to say I was raised by a cattail slough. And that was my first gift from public land, and it's just gotten better over the years.
And that was in what state initially?
Oh, North Dakota.
North Dakota?
No, and it's kind of interesting that North Dakota has the most National Wildlife Refuges.
It does. It
and
does.
Alaska has the biggest. So either way, I'm good.
You've seen both bookends.
Yeah.
So how was hunting different when you moved to Alaska?
It was way different.
Yeah.
It's almost a polar shift from North Dakota, where there's a road every mile and there's a field road every half mile or whatever. But of course, the variety for me, in North Dakota, you couldn't hunt big game until you were 14. So I hadn't been able to do that at least not in terms of actually carrying a gun for a deer or what. So when I got to Alaska, there was no such limitation. So, and big game at that time in that place was a focus. And a lot of that was because we were still feeding ourselves a lot
Yeah.
from big game meat. So my first, well, my first big game animal in Alaska was a black bear. But
You started in the deep end with big game.
pretty much.
Didn't you? Yeah.
In that place that I took that bear now is a state park.
Mm-hmm.
So things have changed a lot since 1971 when I moved to Alaska. But one of the things that really surprised me, I'd read so much about Alaska as a kid, hunting in particular. And so I was expecting, when we drove up the Alaskan, I was expecting when we crossed the border into Alaska, there would be herds of moose and caribou and sheep, and it'd just be everywhere. So we crossed the border, and I'm like, okay. And that didn't happen. And of course we started to see things here and there, but even at that early age, I thought, wait a minute, that's not how it is here. You read things and you envision things, but until you're on the ground looking at it. And so early on I realized, well, this is not going to be about quantity. It's going to be about quality. It's going to be about freedom, and it always has been. So, bird hunting in North Dakota, you just drive around, find a field, turn your dogs loose.
Yep.
In Alaska, we typically will climb a couple hours before even into country that we're going to hunt. But that's such a reward, because when you climb into the alpine from sea level and you break out in the alpine, it's like a new day. Every time you break out in the open, it's just unbelievably wonderful. We have, people talk about ADD, which everybody knows what ADD is, but we actually have ADD, but we have alpine deficiency disorder, which is frankly what I'm feeling right now.
Yeah, this is the flat part of West Virginia. You got to drive further west.
Yeah.
So Christine, you came to hunting later in life. How did your perception of the outdoors change when you started going hunting?
It was a big change, and I think most of it was when I loved going on hikes, loved going on walks, and in my head a lot, and disconnected without really knowing it. When I started hunting, the way you pay attention is completely different. It's surround sound, and you're recognizing that you're walking into an environment that's been going on a lot longer than you showing up, and it's going to be going on after you leave. So it was a way of being able to feel small and an integral whole. And I just felt like, even from day one, that it was going to be an infinite learning experience, that there was just so much more. Every time I go and you leave the field, you know there's so much more to go back to.
So you and Steve, for a long time, had alternating columns in the Anchorage Daily News. How did you communicate with? It's a real question. It's hard to go from experience to prose, right? So how do you, and also you do this in the book, how do you go from these alpine experiences, surround sound like you described, to share that with others, and what perspective did you use?
That's interesting. I'm a big note taker. I have one of those little field notes books, and I'll make a note of something in the field. I try not to think about writing about anything while I'm doing something else. The writing comes later. Steve, we're not professional photographers, but Steve carries a camera, and I think
everywhere I've noticed.
Yeah.
He has one here. Right.
So I think there's different ways that you're gathering reference all the time, and the way that comes together into something that you think's worth sharing. And that's really the ticket. Is this interesting? Is this something that anyone would want to know about?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where writing for a newspaper was so fun, because we were writing for a general
audience.
For me, I guess the best way to say it is when we started doing that, I was able to write from the heart. A lot of my writing before that was, you know, I'm a gun guy, so I'd write like how-tos in terms of shooting and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes for magazines, and it was always be kind of a hero story. And the ADN changed all that, so now I just write from because I love this on that day and I want to share it. It's pretty easy to do when it's like that, really.
Last question for both of you. I've had the pleasure of being with you for a couple days, and you are very passionate, and you're traveling on an insane journey from Alaska to here to South Dakota, all over the place. Maine, you're pretty much traveling as much as you humanly could. So I know you're trying to share the book, and that's really important, but I also know you're trying to communicate with folks too. So what message do you hope folks take, either after reading the book or hearing you talk, like we're going to all enjoy this evening? We'll start with Steve, and then we'll go to Christine.
This might sound strange, but the message I would like for everybody to hear and to appreciate is that, you know, everything we do, no matter where we're doing it or what we're doing, we're affecting something. And so when we talk about public lands, when we talk about these unbelievable opportunities, and we talk about, a lot of people refer to Alaska's public lands as wilderness, which for me is never really rang true, because that land was occupied by indigenous people for thousands of years, and they never thought it was wilderness. Wilderness is something you conquer or something you're afraid of. So I like to think that now, when I think of those places, I think those are places we're kind to. And sometimes, in order to understand that, you actually have to go out there and take it for what it is instead of taking something away. Get out there and really understand what it means to be kind, because you really can't know you can't know how to be kind unless you know what you want to be kind to. It's kind of, I know this sounds weird, but that's how I
No,
feel.
it sounds very relatable. Christine, what message do you hope your audiences take away from either the book or your presentations?
Yeah, there's a lot of messages. I mean, a lot of the book is about a love of dogs and the connection with the dogs and sharing their gifts. But what I really always like to hear is that people feel like going to these places is more accessible when they read these stories, that it's not, you don't have to have the most expensive gear, you don't have to be in sheep shape, or you that it's really a want to proposition. And that's one of the things about public lands that's really incredible, is anybody can go. It's open to everyone. It's not something that you have to have, you don't have to have a lot of money, or, I mean, maybe you have to be able to get there, but once you're there, it's really available to you. It's natural, it's healthy. The reconnecting when we're so disconnected is so what we need more of. So I hope that what you'll find there is so incredible. It's better than the biggest palace in the world in terms of a worthwhile visit, and it can be your backyard also.
Yeah, it is. It is your too.
It doesn't have to be Alaska or Africa or something exotic.
Right.
It can be your backyard. Just the openness to noticing the natural world.
It's a great message to go out on. The book is called The Land We Share, and I want to thank Christine and Steve for sharing a little bit with us here before your presentation this evening. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
So welcome to the National Conservation Training Center. My name is Mark Madison. I am the historian here and organize the public lectures. Appreciate you coming out. A lot of new faces this evening, so it's really nice to see backcountry hunters and anglers joining us. Turn it over to my colleague, Kevin Painter, who along with the speakers came all the way from Alaska to help make this possible. Kevin was integrally involved, not only in this lecture this evening, but also in the book and publicity. So I'll turn over to Kevin Painter. Please give a warm welcome to Kevin Painter, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, all the way from Alaska.
So good evening, everyone. Got a couple introductions here I'd like to do and a few thank yous for the folks who made this book possible. And along the way, we'd like to thank the Friends of NCTC for co-sponsoring this and all the other wonderful things that you do. You do some amazing work, especially with the new series, Wild Reads, which is looking at conservation books and getting those out for more folks to share, kind of like the lecture and presentation there is tonight. So thank you so much. Who are Friends members here in the audience? Friends of NCTC? Oh, great. Okay, super. Great. Another thank you goes, and Mark alluded to this, is to the backcountry hunters and anglers. They really stepped up. They got word when Steve and Christine were up in Maine, they got word that they were coming down here, and they stepped up and pushed out emails and notifications and stuff to their members. Do we have anyone from backcountry hunters and anglers here from the chapter, West Virginia chapter? Okay, cool. Great. And that only leaves me with one other question. Who the heck are the rest of you people? Oh, okay. Now, I know some of you folks are Park Service, some are Fish and Wildlife Service, and some of you know me. I'm Kevin Painter, and Mark said I work in Alaska for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I work for your 16 national wildlife refuges, and I help do visitor services on the 80 million acres that you own in Alaska in the form of national wildlife refuges. And it's a great pleasure and honor to introduce the land we share and Steve and Christine tonight to give this presentation, which I think you're going to thoroughly enjoy. The other thing that's really special about tonight and the fact that you're here is you're kicking off a book tour that Steve and Christine are going to be launched into this year. And it's going to be here, and then they're going to be in the Black Hills of South Dakota, and then they're going to be at D.C. Booth National Fish Hatchery. Then they're going to show up in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and give a presentation there at the National Museum of Wildlife Art. And then it's all going to culminate in the fall in the Big Sky country of Montana, where they're going to be giving presentations at American Prairie's National Discovery Center in Lewistown, Montana, and some other places. So the fact that you're here tonight and the fact that you're probably going to hear and read about some of these tours as they move around the country is pretty darn amazing. And we thank you for being here. You had us nervous at 10 minutes to 7. And we're like, well, I think we're going to be talking to like 4 people, but that's okay. But we appreciate everyone showing up, and thank you for the wonderful turnout. I will have to say, and because Christine and Steve will not tell you this, they are volunteering all their time for all these presentations. Everything that they're going to, they don't get a dime, AKA they're not getting paid. They're donating all their time for this. And it's really wonderful to see people who are helping the conservation cause. The books that are sold in Alaska at our national parks, bless you, our national parks and our national wildlife refuges, and any that we sell here tonight, all that money goes to our nonprofit partner and goes back into national parks, back into national wildlife refuges. So there's no profits that come from these books that's going to go to anyone else except back to the parks to use for interp and education and back to refuges for the same thing. I do have a couple very special thank yous to say to our partners. First, I'd like to thank Debbie Steen, my boss, who isn't here tonight, but for anyone who's half my age, and I know there's quite a few people in here that are, here's the first pro tip of the night. Never pass up an opportunity to thank your boss. Because even if they're not here, you want to be sure to thank them. And Debbie was a true believer in this book, The Land We Share. She not only stepped forward with financial contributions, she also supported connecting people with national wildlife refuges and with our base, which have been hunters who have always supported national wildlife refuges for over 100 years. Debbie also had the great idea. She said, reach out to our partner, our sister agencies, and see if they want to partner on this project. And one of the first partners I contacted was the National Park Service. And Megan Rashad, who isn't here tonight, but is the Alaska region lead for interp education and partnerships, she quickly said yes, along with Lindy, who's here, Lindy Miha. Lindy, if you want to stand up, I'd like to say thank you to the National Park Service. Now, the National Park Service's contribution took what was going to be a good book and kind of elevated it to what became a really, really excellent book. And I'll allude to that a little bit in just a second. The other partner is the Bureau of Land Management, another DOI partner, and Jeff Byersdorf in Alaska. If anyone's worked with Jeff, he stepped forward with financial contributions from BLM and also was a big believer in this book. So those are the folks that really helped make this possible. There's another partner, Alaska Geographic. You'll see it. They're our publisher, our nonprofit. They produced the book, and they stepped in when we needed it most to help coordinate the project, help us how to do it right. And then there's one last person who really was part of our team, and she's here tonight. It's Kathy Lepley, standing over here taking photos for us. And Kathy is the illustrator extraordinaire who did the illustrations in the book, who did the illustrations on the examples we had out there on the table, and also laid the entire book out. So here's another pro tip. If you are an agency person, I'm speaking to you, and you're looking to do excellent publication or whatever, get Kathy's contact information, because this book, less than a month ago, just won National Public Lands Publication of the Year in San Francisco, California. This makes the second book 2 years in a row that won that award that was designed by Kathy. So an amazing talent. So that kind of wraps up some of the thank yous. I'm going to leave you with a quick story, because I know you didn't come hear me talk. You came to see some beautiful photographs and Steve and Christine. But I kind of have to give you an origin story on how this came about, and it's something you all might relate to. So many years ago, I started noticing a pile of newspaper clippings. Does anyone still get this? A newspaper delivered at your house? Well, we used to up until a couple months ago, but there was a pile of clippings that just kept piling up on my side of the dining room table. You know, and you put on your to-do list, clean the dining room table before company comes over. So my wife was tearing these out and putting them on my side. So I finally said, I was like, Casey, that's my wife, I was like, what are all those there for? And she's like, they're there for you to read. She said, you've got to read Christine and Steve's article. They're in the Anchorage Daily News. It's every other week. Christine writes one and Steve writes one. Christine writes from a woman's perspective and someone who came to hunting later in life. Steve's writing from a male perspective, and it's someone that's been hunting since the age of 5. And she said, they talk about connections with land, they talk about connections with dogs, they talk about connections with wildlife. She said, it's all the stuff that you preach at work. And she said, I'm not a hunter. This is my wife speaking. I'm not a hunter. But she said, I get this. I understand what they're saying. And she said, more people need to read their work. I was like, okay. So fast forward a number of years to January 2022, and it's the last pro tip I'm going to give you of the night. And this is for anyone in here who has a pulse. If your partner or your spouse says to you, gives you a suggestion, look into it. Follow up that suggestion. So in January 2022, I sat down and I wrote an email to Christine and Steve, and I'll be really brief on it, but I wrote them an email to ask them a question. It was something that I needed to follow up on. I needed to follow up on these articles and stuff. So I'll read it to you. The email goes, Christine, I've been meaning to reach out to you and Steve to see if you two had plans to put your hunting articles into a book. You and Steve always seem to write about the intrinsic connections people have with hunting, the outdoors, and the land itself. You put into words what many of us feel, but we don't often reflect enough on, or can't muster up the language to express it. So I hope the answer is yes, that a book is planned for the future. Okay, at this point in time, I'm thinking I'm a day late with this idea, as usual. I'm probably many, many dollars short. They've already signed some big book contract, but I just need to ask that question, follow up on that my wife's suggestion, and I'll read you the rest of the email, how it goes on as I continue the email. Last but certainly not least, I send my heartfelt condolences to you and Steve for the loss of Cheyenne, your chocolate lab. Your recent article about Cheyenne reminded my family of our current and previous dogs with whom we shared tents, we shared campers, we shared homes, we shared trails, and we shared our lives with. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Steve Meyer and Christine Cunningham and the land we share. I don't want to take your notes.
Thank you, Kevin. So it feels really good to be here and see so many friendly faces in the crowd. From the very beginning of this project, Steve and I felt very supported by the Public Lands Agency partners and Alaska Geographic. We're especially grateful to Kevin, and now I realize Casey, for having the idea to put the stories together into a book. And Kathy Lepley, her design, the illustrations. My favorite part of this project was getting to see her sketches when they came through each week, and well, each month, however long it was between them. But they really bring the book to life. And so thank you, Kevin and Kathy, for being here. The Land We Share is a celebration of public lands and the connections and relationships that can form around hunting. The subtitle is A Love Affair Told in Hunting Stories. And the book hasn't been out very long, but people ask, what does the love affair part mean? Is that a love of the wildlife, the lands, the dogs, each other? And it's really all encompassing. So I was born and raised in Alaska, but I didn't start, no one in my family hunted. And my first memory and my best experiences were outdoors. So I got my start as a writer at summer camp at age 10. This particular camp gave out badges for building a fire and building a shelter, and I didn't earn any of those. So it was about, at the end of the camp, I saw that they had this poetry badge. And so I signed up for that, and a bunch of us kids learned about a Japanese form of poetry called a haiku. And so I went out into the woods, they gave us a piece of paper and a pen and said, go write one of these. And so I sat in front of this old moss-covered tree, and I just listened, and I listened, and the poetry just started coming to me. I filled up my page, I filled up the margins, I filled up the backside, and it occurred to me that nature was a source of truth. And that stayed with me throughout my life. I carry a field notebook with me when I go in the field. I'll write a few lines. It wasn't until I was 27 when Steve invited me.
When she invited herself, I didn't want her to go. No, that's not true. But she did invite herself.
On a duck hunt. And that was a life-changing experience for me. I was completely immersed in the totality of the outdoors. I saw a new way of learning and being in nature, and being a participant in nature instead of just an observer. It just woke me up to a whole new world. And it showed me so many things, and I'm really grateful for hunting, really grateful for public lands to hunt on, and I'm really grateful to be here with all of you and talk about the land we share.
Are you done? Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. You know, in today's world, it seems like time is so precious, and it's really hard to break away to do something like this. So it's humbling that all of you are here. So I'd like to first say Wanishi, which means thank you in the dialect of the Lenape people. They were the first people here thousands of years ago. So so unlike Christine, I grew up hunting. I started hunting when I was 5 years old. Similar to Christine in that I browbeat my father until he let me go. And I probably got sick or tired of hearing me wanting to go. But it came to me, I just wanted to be outside. I wanted to be out with what he was doing. And so the wonderful thing about that, when I was that age, they started taking me, him and his friends, and we would go, and they always treated me like I was one of them. I wasn't a kid. I was there to do what they did. So if they were cold, I was cold. If they were hungry, I was hungry. You know, if we were crawling through mud to sneak up on whatever, I did that too. And so through that, you know, if I didn't get up to go, if I didn't get up at 4:30 in the morning, I didn't go. So I became basically the alarm clock for if it was time to go hunting. And you know, maybe my dad was out late on Friday or whatever. He never got a break, after that. I'd be up, getting him up, we can go, so I could go. So through that, I learned the responsibility of taking care of the game. It became my job to clean the ducks, clean the pheasants, all those things, taking care of them, and also learned all the regulations and identifications, all those things. And the time I was 8 years old, I was a pretty responsible kid. And that's when my dad gave me my first rifle, and it was a Winchester 22. And when he gave it to me, he said, I'm going to take you out to this place. I'm going to show you. And so it was about a half-mile walk from our farm, and we come up to this cattail slough. And there, on a sign posted by that slough was a white sign with blue lettering, and there was a big blue goose flying across it, and it said, National Wildlife Refuge System. And he pointed to that sign, he said, if you take care of this place, if you respect it, it'll always be here for you. It'll always be a place for you to come. It'll be a place where you can get away from your mother, who didn't like me very much, and who could blame her, really? But so I like to say I was raised by that slough. From that day, I spent literally every waking free moment, I'd head to that slough. I'd be there before the sun came up, watch the world come alive. I'd be there while it got dark and watch it go to sleep. And so I learned so many things from that. And so that was really my first experience with the wonders of public land. And then in 1971, when we moved to Alaska, I got plopped in the middle of the greatest public land place in the world, maybe. And all of a sudden, I had access to all these wonderful chunks of land that were still essentially untamed. So for us, public land, you know, a lot of people talk about, well, we can do this or we can do that on public land, and for us, it's a little different than that. It's about being able to go out and be free to go forth and let what happens happens. We don't, you know, sometimes we'll take a trail, but it's only to get past the trail. That's, for us, that's where it really starts. That's where there's, it's not silent, it's never silent there, but there's an absence of irritating sound. And it's when you get to that place, then you can really feel connected. You can hear everything and see everything and get to know what's there and get to know what your impact is on all the things, whether it be land or birds or animals or any of those things. And so that's really what this is about. One of the things that people talk about, especially when they hear Alaska and talk about public land, they say wilderness. You guys got all this wilderness, and yeah, I can see why people would think that, because there's just vast areas of Alaska that's undeveloped, but it's not really wilderness. All that land was roamed by indigenous people long before any of us, you know, started to use the land. So, and it wasn't a place that, you know, wilderness people, something to be scared of or something to conquer, and it never really was that. It was home for those people, and that's how we like to feel when we're out there, when you have the ability to be out there. It's a place you can fall in love with things and places every day, and it's a freedom unlike, I think it's the last vestige of real freedom we have in the world. So, but the thing is about love affairs is they have to start somewhere. And ours started in prison. You're supposed to laugh at that. at the time, I was working at the prison, and I had a lot of different things I did there. But one of the things was orienting new employees when they got hired on. Well, Christine came to work there as an administrative person. So she walked into my office one day, and I had a phone call to make. So I told her, just have a seat, and I'll get back with you as I make this phone call. Well, she didn't have a seat. Instead, she wandered around my office. I had all sorts of, a lifetime of artifacts in my office. And when I got off the phone, she was reading a framed quote from Theodore Roosevelt. And for those of you that know him well, he made a speech in France in 1910, and it's called Man in the Arena. And so I didn't say anything. I watched her, and when she finished it, she looked up at me and she said, well, that kind of hits you where you live, doesn't it? And at that moment, I thought, well, it's a little more to this person than I first thought. So then comes the torture of, well, it was clear there was an attraction, but there's this cavernous age gap, and I didn't know what to do about that. So I talked to some female friends, and they told, well, yeah, it's fine, no problem. So I don't know if Christine invited me to dinner, or I invited her, but whatever it was, we're sitting in my favorite restaurant, and there's wildlife mounts all over this place. Wonderful restaurant. And she's sitting across from me, and I said, what are you doing? And she said, well, I'm having dinner. And I said, no, what are you doing here with me? I mean, there's lots of other options for you. You could be with someone who isn't old enough to be your father. And she says,
I don't need a note.
yeah, that's what she said. I don't need a note. And so I blurted out. I said, well, I'm not getting married. I'm not having kids. I do what I want when I want. And by the way, if my pager goes off, you'll have to find your own way home. And she says, well, get out the paperwork. I'm like, what paperwork? She said, this sounds like a limited liability thing, so just get it out and I'll sign it. Well, that was like 22 years ago, and here we are. So I'm going to read you a short excerpt from the book that kind of sums up our relationship. Our relationship wasn't cemented in roses, silk, or diamonds. Over time, it was carved in mountain wind and glacial ice into the granite slopes we climb. It's filled with the smells of mountain flowers, tidal sloughs, and the breath of an English setter. Labradors retrieving and English setters coursing the mountain slopes are our poetry. The cry of a distant goshawk, the rustle of flushing wings, and the whistle of widgeons are music. It's as enduring as Winchester's points. It won't be found in the grand romantic literature, but by any definition, a love story it is.
It is. One of the early conversations we had about this book was, is it going to be a book that includes photos? So a lot of Steve's photos ran with the stories that were in the newspaper, and we thought, is this going to be a coffee table book? And we were working with Kevin and Andy at Alaska Geographic at the time, and we all agreed it would be a book for readers. So the photos aren't in the book, but they really worked behind the scenes as we were pulling the stories together. So we thought it would be neat to share some of the photos with you, and it'll introduce you to some of the characters in the book. So this is Jack. Jack was my first hunting dog. I got him when he was a year old because he was too much for the family who had him to handle. And I had just gone on my first pheasant hunting trip to North Dakota. And it was with Steve and Steve's dad's lifelong best friend, Eddie, who had a little English cocker named Windsor. And little dog isn't any taller than the grass, and he's going to work in front of us all day long. So when I first see him, I said, oh, he's such a cute little dog. And Eddie said, did you hear that? She called you a dog. Oh, great, anthropomorphism. But Eddie said he was getting older, And anymore, he only went because Windsor wanted to go. And I thought, gosh, that seems so backwards. I'm thinking about getting a dog to help me retrieve ducks, not so that I have to go and I don't want to. I understand it a little better now. But came back, and I got Jack, and he ruined all the furniture in my house. He left Jack-shaped marks on the furniture. And there's an old adage that retrievers aren't dogs, they're family. And that's what I learned from Jack.
So I grew up with hunting dogs. We always had a lab or a golden retriever or a Chessie. And when we moved to Alaska, we still had dogs like that. Well, but then my life took a turn, and I was on call all the time, and so I didn't really have the time that needs to be dedicated to have a hunting dog. So I didn't have one for a long time. But when Christine came into the picture, that part of my life was getting behind me, and I was ready to get another dog. So we rescued Gunner. That's Gunner. We went to this place where he was, this shelter he was kept at, and he was in a wire cage, and he had been there for almost his time limit. And we were just lucky that someone called us and told us about this. So he's in this cage, and the tops of his front paws are licked raw from his anxiety. And we instantly kind of fell in love with him. We took him out in the backyard to make sure he was going to love us, and he did. And he was such a wonderful dog. And this photo reminds me of how he really was. We would go hunting, and he'd retrieve ducks, but he didn't ever like the taste of them. As soon as he'd get close, he'd spit them out. And but this is what he liked. He liked to sit by the sloughs and watch the late flights, and he was just always special that way. And of course, like so many of them, he left early.
This is Cheyenne. This is the first dog I ever picked out of a litter, or I might say Steve picked her. I'd picked out this little lump of joy puppy. It was asleep in my arms, and Steve kept noticing the runt of the litter who was fighting with somebody's shoelaces and jumping on the other puppies, and he kept saying, "Look at this one, she's got spirit." And I was like, "Oh, is that good?" 'Cause I didn't, oh yeah, you want that in a bird dog. And so we came home with Cheyenne, and sure enough, she just was a natural hunter. She loved going. She kept us out longer than we probably would have stayed. Her joy was absolutely contagious. And she would fit herself into whatever you were doing. My favorite story about her is we're out duck hunting midday, and we see some widgeon on a pond about 400 yards away. And so I said, "Hey, Steve, could you hold Cheyenne back? I'm going to crawl up on these widgeon." And I didn't want her to rush in and flush the birds. So he's holding her back, and I'm crawling along, and I can hear she's broke loose. Oh,
She
no,
slipped out of her collar.
And I'm thinking, oh no, all this crawling for naught. She's going to bust those birds. And instead, when she got up to me, she just tucked in close and crawled with me. And it was the coolest thing, because a lot of people who train dogs, they want them to do what you say. They want a dog to do what it's commanded to do. And really, a hunting partner, they're watching what you do, they're fitting themselves into it, and that's exactly what she did.
This is Roosevelt Winchester. He's named for Theodore Roosevelt, and of course for the first gun I had when I was a kid. But he, just briefly, that when you see that antenna on the collar, that's a GPS collar. And Winchester is a big running setter, and in the mountains that we hunt, oftentimes he'll be half a mile ahead of us. So that's how we keep track of where he's at. But he came into our lives because Christine can't hold her liquor. We were hosting a Ducks Unlimited banquet. Well, Christine's not a drinker, but she was going to MC this banquet, and she thought, maybe some wine will ease the nerves. Well, it did, but then she thought more would be better. So by the time we get to the live auction, she was kind of on her lips. And there was this beautiful Beretta 28 gauge over under shotgun that no one was meeting the minimum bid on. And so Christine's like, I'll be having that. And so when she did that, she had no idea that that gave me permission for a lifelong dream, which is to have an English setter. Because I told her, well, now that you have a proper upland gun, we have to have a proper upland dog. So that's how he came into our lives. And as you can see from the photos, you know, he took us places, and I attribute so much of our connection, the deeper connection, because of him, because he would take us places we would probably never have went, and we just follow him, and he just loved it, and he'll be 14 in a few days. He's gotten old, but the memories that he's given us and the time that we've shared with him is just priceless. So we go year round. It doesn't matter if it's hunting season or not. We're always in the mountains with the dogs, in the snow, in the rain, and whatever. So this, and another comment about the photos that you see, any photos of live birds or animals, there's no harm come to those birds or animals. If they give us permission to make a photo of them, then we're not gonna shoot them. Okay, so anything you see like that, that's not what happens. So, but pointing dogs, for those of you that don't know, what they do is they course the country, and they're looking for scent. They're sniffing the air, and they'll pick up scent, and we call it a scent cone. So, and it might be weak, and so they start following this scent. And pretty soon, they're narrowing down what they're looking for, and it becomes a hot scent. And at some point, they'll know that they're close, and they will go into a statuesque position. So that's what's called being on point. And then if there's other pointing dogs in the field with them, when this happens, then those dogs immediately stop. Wherever they're at, they stop, and that's called honoring the point. So, but when you're hunting with pointing dogs, there's another kind of honoring the point, and that is the hunter is responsible for going up, flushing the bird, and taking it or not, depends on what the situation is. But the problem with that sometimes is when Winchester will be, a half a mile ahead of us, and all of a sudden he'll go straight up a granite slope, and he'll go on point. And so you really have no choice but to go up there. And so now I'm going to read another excerpt from another story in the book, and this is called Honoring a Point. So the day starts out, it was late September, and where we hunt in Alaska in the mountains, it takes about an hour to 2 hours for us to get wherever we're actually going to start hunting. And that means we get into the alpine. And so once we get into the alpine, then Winchester, we turn him loose and he starts going. So, and that's how it was this day. So Winchester broke into overdrive, as he does when the country opens, and was soon a half-mile distant, coursing the mountain valley floor. That's when the chest pain started. Not wanting to ruin the day, I didn't say anything, and I kept climbing for another 15 minutes until it became so bad I was doubled over, holding my chest. As I rocked in pain on my knees, and Christine tried to determine what was going on, I looked up to see Winchester make an abrupt turn to the west and run straight up a Granite Mountain Creek chute, 700 vertical feet above us. He locked into a point. So Thinking it was my heart, Christine insisted we needed to head back down and get to the hospital. Two things I told her: if it is my heart, we're 2 hours away from help. Whatever is going to happen is already going to have happened. And Winchester is up there on point. I'll do the best I can to get up there, but you've got to honor his point. She says, well, what if you die? What am I supposed to do then? I said, well, the truck keys are in the top of my pack. I would say head down and tell someone where to find the corpse. Now get up there, he's holding like a champ. So I half crawled and stumbled my way up behind her, and I was still several hundred feet below them when Christine eased past Winchester. The white-tailed ptarmigan flushed and dropped, and it seemed a long time before I heard the report of the shot. I continued to claw my way up, and as I did, the pain began to ease. And when I got to her, she was sitting there with her bird in hand, and she said, well, glad you're not dead. And she said, your boy's up there on another bird, you need to go up and get it. And he was, and I did. So a few days later, I hadn't been to the doctor. I don't like going to the doctor. And the mountains called. And she couldn't go, so it would be Winchester and I. And she said, so you think if you die up there, Winchester will just find his own way home? I was like, dang it. You know, you can go a lifetime and never find a hunting partner, much less a life partner that not only gets who you are, but celebrates it. Thank you.
This is along came Parker. We had Winchester, and we thought about maybe getting a puppy of his to have and have a brace of setters to hunt behind. So we got Parker. And I love this photo because Parker and Winchester are about as different from each other as two dogs could be. He's very serious and professional, and if she sees a group of birds, she wants to bust them like they're seagulls at the park, and it's the funnest thing. So you can see in this photo, she's very happy, and Winchester's thinking she's pretty unprofessional. But Steve and I are not breeders, so that's why we kept a litter of puppies. This is Boss, Purdy, Colt, Cogswell, and Hugo. We hadn't intended to keep up all of them, but we did, and they're 9 years old now, but they're always going to be the puppies to us. This summer that they were puppies, it was like we were 3 men and a baby. It was trying to potty train them and figure out who did what was quite the adventure. But this is probably the happiest moment of my life, was hanging out with these dogs and getting to know them. People who are professional bird dog people will tell you, don't do this. Like, don't keep a litter of puppies. They probably will tell you not to even keep litter mates because it'll be difficult to train them. They may bond more with each other than with you, that you won't get to know them as individuals, all these things. So Steve and I decided to take each one of the puppies on their own adventure. So this is Colt, and he got to ride in a bush plane. And he just got to be wild and free in the big country. He would get tired. We were hunting, so we would have to pack him around, and sometimes we would have to stop so that he could take a nap. This is Boss. He got to be an honorary duck dog, so he went with us over to the west side of Alaska's Cook Inlet. And at the time, he was about the size of a snowshoe hare. So I was really terrified that like an eagle would swoop in and pick him up, or an owl. So I was always chasing after him. But it was so fun watching him learn to fit into this totally different environment and figure out who he was. Cheyenne was not impressed with our idea to bring along a whitish puppy on a duck hunt. So I painted up his face in camo, so you can't see him here. All of the dogs, we had 5 different English setters, all with a hunting bloodline, same bloodline, but not all of them were hunters. Not all of them were big runners like Winchester. So this is Cogswell. We call him Grandpa Cogsy because he's the first one to mistakenly think that we're heading back home. Boss is, these are pointing dogs, so they're supposed to be pointing birds, but Boss is up for pointing anything, bugs, birds, anything. And he's a very close working dog. So Winchester's a big runner, Boss is very close working, and sometimes he's too close working. He's just a lover. Purdy, the only female in the litter, big running dog, and I'm not sure she knows what she's running out there for. In this picture, anybody who's ever hiked up to the top of a mountain and then gotten down at the end of the day probably knows how painful it was that she turned around and ran back up. And we had to go get her. And so this is me after I've just got her and after a second climb of the same mountain. But we love taking all of them in different groups, getting to know them, sometimes singles, doubles, sometimes 3. Of all of the puppies, only one of them is really anything like Winchester, and that's Hugo. I like to think of him as my spirit animal. He's sort of the uninhibited creature that I wish I could be. He's got serious faults as a bird dog, but I'm proud of him every time he does something right. This photo is a lie, so I'll tell you what the lie is. It looks like Hugo's pointing this bird, but one of his problems is he creeps up. So most pointing dogs will go on point and hold, and he just keeps getting a little closer incrementally. So. But following a bird dog, so if you're following a trail, you know what your destination is. And when you're following a bird dog in the field, you're following their nose. And so you have no idea where it's going to take you. Because you're watching the dog, the landscape is visually coming before you as the dog traverses it. So it's just really quite the experience. I'm always floored by what we see and how we see it. Following that tail, it's like a painter's paintbrush in some of the country that we go into. So it's always just visually beautiful, just like Winchester. We don't know where we're going to end up that day, but it's always amazing. Here he's doing something right. This is Hugo. Hugo pointing rock ptarmigan. I learned how to use the pointer. He's sometimes a little like his mom, Alice in Wonderland. But just more of the country that we get to see with them. I love this photo because he looks like a snow leopard to me. This big country in Alaska. There's a story in the book called Unlikely Harmony. We had thought that Winchester might teach Hugo how to be what Winchester was, and that just didn't happen.
Winchester hates all his puppies. He just hates them.
He's not going to get Father of the Year. But he wouldn't teach Hugo. But they did find a way of working together separately. So it's just these gorgeous figure eights on separate tracks in the mountains. It worked out. So rare photos are ones where they're both together. This is another photo that's a lie. Winchester is pointing these 2 birds, and it looks like Hugo pointed them and Winchester's backing Hugo. Really, Winchester pointed them and Hugo's sneaking up to be first. It's bad. This one.
Oh yeah, this one takes a little bit of explaining.
Do you want the pointer?
No. When this started out, Hugo was pointed off this direction, and we couldn't see what it was, but that's where he was pointed. And then you can go ahead. If you look kind of in the center, you'll see a bird. That's a hen white-tailed ptarmigan. And what it was there's a brood of her chicks that he pointed. She was frozen in the rocks, but then when he did that, she moved to distract him, which she did, and that's why his head's turned. But that time he was perfectly good pointing dog and held his point, and so we just pulled him off and went on our way.
So I'd been duck hunting and upland bird hunting with the dogs, and I was thinking about maybe going big game hunting. So for the first time, we planned this trip into Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, go up to the Brooks Range for caribou. And we drove up the Hull Road, which is a 400 some odd mile gravel road where you just feel like you're going back in time, and you meet all these different critters along the way. Muskox, we met this little guy, ground squirrel. We were gonna take a bush plane out to where we would camp to hunt for caribou, and we're just so disconnected in the modern world to get in this plane and be flying over this place that's just got so much grandeur, and it's so much bigger than you. And we look down and we see this wolf, and this wolf is following the porcupine caribou herd. And you just look down at that and you think, you're just this insect buzzing in his sky, and it just puts it all in perspective, what your part is in the world, and what you're really doing out there. I wasn't sure going on a big game hunt if I would actually shoot an animal. So I wouldn't have gone if I didn't talk to Steve and say, there's a chance that we go hunting, I see a bull that's legal to shoot, and I don't shoot it. And that was going to be okay. That was okay with him. And I needed for that to be okay with him, to be comfortable going, because I really had no idea how I would feel when I got out there. There was abundant game. We found a beautiful bull, took the bull, I learned how to field dress it, and the range of emotion was just so intense. Just ultimate joy, incredible sadness, all these things all at once. And I was so proud. I wanted to pack all the meat out myself, which when I started to do it, then I was like, a little help. But mostly, I was really, the place is just, it haunts you. And I knew I hadn't spent enough time out there. I knew we would go back, and we did end up going back.
We 2 years later, we went back during summer solstice, where it never gets dark up in that part of the world. And we just went up to be with the porcupine herd as they were migrating. So it's an amazing thing to see. When I was a kid, I would read about the the enormous herds of antelope on the Serengeti and the bison that roamed the Great Plains. And modern day, this is for North America, this is about as close as you can get. So it's just incredible.
Sorry.
And folks, you hear people talk about, well, the North Slope, that's barren wasteland, but it's anything but that. There's all sorts of things that you would probably never see anywhere else. And if you just take the time and just be there, and so that's what we did. We just went up and got to know the country and built a better relationship with it. And we took Colt on that trip. Now, Colt loves to go, but then he gets tired, and so he goes into the tent and grabs his bed and brings it out, telling you that it's time to go. And that's just another image of this incredible place.
This is the newest addition to our family. His name's Rigby. He came to us during the pandemic, so it was definitely a lifesaver. He just, for me,
What are you doing over there?
He got to hang out with Cheyenne and learn a little bit from her, but mostly we just took him everywhere with us. We took him ice fishing. We took him when we go to get firewood. He got to discover all these different new things, and I felt like I was living vicariously through him a little bit. His first year is a real duck dog. This photo, I love it. It took me so long as an adult to learn how to identify birds in the sky by their shape or their wing beats or whatever. Steve could point out birds, and I'd always be, are those seagulls? Are those ravens? Are those ducks? Took me a while. I finally got it, but Rigby got it fast. I mean, if it was ducks, he was really excited, and he would just have this expression of excitement. So here Steve captured this picture where we're both looking up at the same flock of teal, and just definitely a duck dog, came into his own. He's
What you don't understand is Christine loves this dog, like to the point of ridiculousness. If you take a duck and he doesn't want to go get it, she just swims out and gets it. That's how much she loves Rigby.
I think I've enabled them a little too, because they talk about bird dogs that some want help and some don't want any help. And Rigby wants help. Like, he'll go to find the bird. If he doesn't find it real quick, he's like, "Little help." Like, he's a little lazy. He doesn't love the mountain hikes, but we take him. We put this orange bandana around him because otherwise he'd look like a brown bear. And we just want people to know that's our dog. He's just wanting his cheeseburger at the end of the day.
This next bunch of photos is just what I call the let it happen photos. We're not professional photographers, but we're out there. And my younger day, I took a lot of photos, but I never took a camera when I was hunting. And it was Winchester that changed that. Seeing what he did, how he run that country, demanded that we record that. And so ever since, I've been, slow down a minute. We always take a camera, and so just being out there and just letting things happen, they happen. It's kind of amazing. This one is something that haunts me. We were headed in the mountains that day, and we're driving along the coast. We had Hugo. We were going up in the mountains to hunt, or not hunt, just for a mountain run. And we drive past this opening along the arm there, and this humpback whale was just there. And so we pulled over and we ran down to it like there was anything we could have done, but there wasn't. But anyway, it was so surreal to stand next to that amazing creature. You know, we see him in the water all the time, and, but that was something different, and it's very haunting.
No.
Yeah. This is a common site where we sometimes go down to the river when the sockeyes are running. Of course, everybody knows all sheep. But just being there, that's the thing. It's just being there and being quiet and building that relationship, those kind of things happen. This little guy, we went on a deer hunting trip to Kodiak, and we lost Parker, the mom of the puppies, just a few days before our trip was scheduled. So we almost canceled it, but we went, and but we weren't in the mindset to be hunting. We just wanted to be there. But even so, I would go on walks around the camp, and this little guy would follow me, and then he'd get tired, and he'd lay down and take a nap, and when I would come back, he'd still be there, and I'd wake him up, and we'd go back to camp. But so Andy Hall, who is the executive director for Alaska Geographic, who we published the book with, he posed the question, so what is a successful hunt? Do you have to kill something for the hunt to be successful? It's a great question. It's and of course the easy answer is no, because you don't have to kill something. But there's a fellow named excuse me, Jose Ortega y Gasset. He was a Spanish philosopher from the mid-1900s, and he wrote a book, Meditations on Hunting, and it's a very popular book, but in it he says, one does not hunt to kill, rather one kills to have hunted. And that's the one thing in that book I was like, yeah, that doesn't make sense. That of course you go hunting and you don't always kill, you're not always successful, or you make the choice not to take an animal for a variety of reasons. And so, you know, in the modern world, it's people will sometimes ask, and understandably, well, why are you still hunting? You can go get your food at the store. And okay, fair enough, but there's a spiritual aspect to it. There's a connection that's completing the life cycle as how it was intended, at least in our world. And so it's an opportunity to harvest the best protein, healthiest protein you can get. But it's also something as more people enter the world and more habitat is encroached on, there comes a greater responsibility. And I think that's probably the biggest thing when we talk about all this, is that there's a great responsibility, and it goes far beyond the bag limit that's in the game regulation book or you know, or whatever. So I'm going to read you another excerpt. I know you're probably getting tired of me reading, but one more. So it was late September, and I was headed into the mountains for black bear. For me, black bear, berry-fed black bear is some of the best eating you can get anywhere. And so I climbed up into this mountain. I was on a ridge, and to the north of me, about a mile across, there was another ridge that was a little higher. And so this black bear came out at about 3,500 feet above sea level, and where he was, and I was watching him, and the way he was moving, I was pretty sure he was going to come down that slope, cross right below me, and I'd be easy rifle shot distance. But that took a while, and so I spent that day watching this bear, and he would go for a while, and then he'd sit on his big fat butt and tear berries up, and he's throwing stuff, and he'd throw some in his mouth, and then he'd lay down and take a little nap and roll over, and they're just, so anyway, I mean, I spent the day on the mountain with this bear, and when he came down to where I was, what went through my mind was, if I shoot this bear, that he'll never have another day like that, and I didn't take him. And so I don't think that that's unique to me, and so I wrote a story about it, and I'll read you a short excerpt from it. And the name of the chapter is The Annex of a Bear Disarm a Hunter. Hunting is a holistic endeavor, a melding of the spirit with the natural world, where the kill is something of value, done with reverence and respect, and where, when that spirit flows through the hunter, tells him that choosing not to kill carries the same weight. My sharing this comes from knowing other hunters have had similar experiences. It seems with time the connection we have with what and where we hunt grows and prompts deeper thought for our actions in the field. I believe we are born hunters, not killers, and will always be hunters even when we don't kill. Thank you.
So most of these photos are from Steve. This one is from me, particularly early on when I was on the duck flats, which are a place I would drive by on the way to work and not really take much notice of. I would notice the mountains in the distance, but I wouldn't necessarily notice that there was any life or any value to the wetlands between the highway and the coast. But when I started hunting, I started seeing more and more of this. And so this was coming back from the blind one morning, I see these dragonflies, and seems like there's 100 of them, and they're all frozen. And so I get really close, and at the time I had one of those little pocket cameras, and so I'm like 1 inch away from these when I took this photo, and I noticed that their feet are moving. Oh, they're not dead. And what I realized, and it wasn't something I read, it was something I discovered on the spot for myself. I realized the dew had come in and weighted down their wings so that they were too heavy for them to fly, and they're waiting for the sun to come up and dry out their wings, and they're just vulnerable and stranded there. And it just really hit me how everything was struggling to survive, and that I was coming into a morning that had been going on long before I got there, that would continue to go on long after I'd left. So this was a pretty big aha moment for me, and it just made me pay so much more attention.
That's a turkey. Well, actually, that's not true, but when people see that photo, they say, is that a turkey? But that's a male spruce grouse in breeding season, and they're beautiful birds, but he's trying to track a girlfriend.
Steve and I really got to know the ptarmigan, and willow ptarmigan in particular. We do these spring breeding surveys, and they're very kooky when they're mating. The males are very territorial. They're beautiful with their eye combs, but a lot of people don't know that there's really 3 different species of ptarmigan in Alaska. This is the rock ptarmigan with the band across the eyes and the tail. And then our very favorite is the white-tailed ptarmigan.
Yeah, for us, they represent the wild places, maybe more than even the Dall sheep. They live year-round above the tree line. They're the smallest of the ptarmigan. They're also the ptarmigan we know least about. And so we've kind of fell in love with these birds, and anymore we take very few, but the fact that they're up there and it's still a wild place is really important to us.
Yeah, I sometimes think about it in the middle of winter when it's 20 below and they're up there on the mountain. There's beautiful, tough little birds. They're about the size of a quail. This is, again, the willow ptarmigan in the winter. I read this somewhere about collective nouns or the group names of animals or anything, and the group name for ptarmigan is an invisibleness of ptarmigan. And it's really apropos. Like, if you're ever out in the field, like a lot of times you'll be up in the mountains and you really get sort of snow blind. It all just looks like white and you can't differentiate a lot. And there'll just be this change of light, and this bank of snow will suddenly just lift up, and it's this big group of ptarmigan. And it's super cool. So I'm going to read a short excerpt from the book. And to preface this, a lot of the places where we go hunting, where we access the places we're going to go, old mining trails, some of them are put in by mules, and they're those zigzags you might see up the mountain, which are really great for the kind of thinking which, when I'm on a trail, I can get into my head quite a bit, and I stop paying attention, and I start thinking. And in this particular story, I'm thinking about the gold miner that put in this trail. There's a memorial to the gold miner at the top. And so I'm thinking about how there's this comparison between hunters and gold miners going after a resource. I'm thinking about how often I'd heard that ptarmigan might pick up gold because it's grit, and they keep the gravel in their crop for digestion. That's never been proven true. Lots of people have told me that no way. But so I'm having all these thoughts. I'm in my head, and on the one hand, and then up this way on the other hand. And I think that one of the things I love most about hunting is, I read Ian McGilchrist is an author from the UK, and he talks about how in our modern world today, people are so in their left brain that they're so cognito ergo sum, like I think, therefore I am, and how we really need to be more Sincito ergo sum, I feel, therefore I am. I loved that because being outdoors and paying attention as a hunter, I really feel more in my body. And but that's not where this story begins. This is an excerpt from Hunting Ptarmigan in Gold Country. We walked the highest field of rocks and watched as Hugo descended into another valley. This one was quieter, and I struggled to understand why. It seemed that maybe it had less exposure to the collective memories of hikers and miners than the previous valley, braided with trails and history. This one appeared wilder, less examined. There was no twisted metal or traces of the Kenai Peninsula gold rush. The sound of ptarmigan echoed from down the creek bed, but I could not tell from where it came. The wind was strong as it swept across the top of the mountain, and the air was so heavy with mist on the edges where Hugo searched that he never found birds. After an hour, our hands were numb from cold, and we turned back. This time I noticed the lime green of the moss that grew verdant where water seeped from the rocks. In a faster current or drier light, it would not appear so lush. The mountains seemed to glow at the moment, and each raw thing of beauty was rare for being such a mixture of place and time. We came to hunt birds, but like the miner, our fever had more to do with a pursuit than with fortune. At the truck, we dried off Hugo and put away our wet guns and gear. Steve stopped on the bridge where the beaver worked and looked for him again, as he always did. And I felt I understood, just for a moment, how the mountain remembered its visitors.
I love that one.
Thank you. These last ones are just for fun.
Yeah, these are, we have hunting dogs, but we're out with them year round, and there's a lot more just fun and doing this than there is actually shooting things. That's Cogswell. He likes to tell you when it's time to go home. That's how he does it. And this is that same little fox who just come around and hang out with him. Winchester is a serious dog. When he was a puppy, back in those days you could get him off the airplane at 7 weeks. So, but we didn't know what to do with him because he wouldn't take a treat, wouldn't have a toy, wasn't cuddly. He just wanted to hunt. That's all he wanted to do. And but when we started going in the mountains, when we would take a break, that's what these two did. They were like 6-year-old kids up there in the mountain playing. And those are like some of the best memories we have. Hugo believes that everyone is furniture. And he never misses an opportunity to prove that. And that's Rigby Classic. This was this fall. He's just on a break, which is what he likes to do best in the mountains, or get his butt scratched. This is one of my favorite images. We had climbed into a place. Winchester took us to this place that we had never been before. We got up on this plateau where there were sheep beds. You could still smell the sheep that had been there the night before. And there was a glacier up there that we had no idea was there, which is almost gone now. But anyway, we stopped and they were up there dancing around like kids. This is one of my favorite images.
It's the last
What?
slide.
That's it? Well, okay, so there's a couple of things I wanted to talk about. When I was talking about public land earlier and talking about wilderness and wild places, and I like to think of what we're doing with public land is those are places that we've decided to be kind to. And so, Andy Warhol, of all people, said something that I really like, if I can find it. He said, "I think having land and not ruining it is the most beautiful art that anyone could ever want." That's a pretty strong statement, and it reflects, I think, how hopefully most of us feel about the land that we still have. But this morning it reminded me of something. When I was a kid, I would go places with my dad. And one day, I think I was about 6 years old at the time, and we were driving along. This was in the prairie pothole region of North Dakota, so there's lots of little sloughs and so forth. And out of the side of the road comes this mallard duck, and right behind her is a bunch of ducklings. And so they all go across the road in this row like they do. And of course, I'm a kid and I'm not very bright. And so when they had all crossed the road, I'm like, okay, let's go, whatever. I don't remember what we were doing, but I was in a hurry to get going. And he said, no, you gotta wait for a minute. And so we sat there, and pretty soon, the last duckling came out and joined his family. And that's, I'm sure probably a lot of you have seen that. But when I thought about that, you know, you have to know how to be kind. And you have to know these places, what lives there, how it's all connected, in order to really be kind. Because we can do things without knowing it and think that we're being kind, and maybe we missed a mark sometime. So that kind of, the thing is, when you, I've discovered that as the older I get, the better my distant memory is and the worse my immediate memory is. You know, I can forget what I had for breakfast, but I think about things from 5 years old. So Kevin Painter, he posed a question kind of when this first, when the book was first released. He said, so what do you think our public land legacy is? And it's a great question. And, so I thought about that a lot. And here's my kind of my way of saying what I think. So in 1800, there were 1 billion people on the planet, more or less. There were 75% of the land remained essentially wild. There were 5 billion passenger pigeons in America. Roughly 30 million bison roamed the plain. By 1914, Martha, the last passenger pigeon, died in captivity. At that time, we were just starting to bring back from near extinction the bison. So by the 30s, there was 2.3 billion people. 66% of the land remained essentially as it was, undeveloped. Time I moved to Alaska in 1971, there was 3.7 billion people. And there was about 56% of the land undeveloped. Now we're 2024, and got 8 billion people in the world, and there's only about 35% of the land that's undeveloped. So, you know, I was thinking about that and looking at different things, and then I saw this piece. Someone was kind of writing about what's left. Where is it? And they named 5 countries that have are the holdout for these essentially undeveloped wild places, and they were Russia, Brazil, Australia, Canada, and the United States. And in parentheses next to the United States, it said Alaska. And when I saw that, it just hit me like, yeah, you know, Alaska in some ways is maybe the last place we have to get it right. And so for me, that's what our public land legacy should be. Is we have this marvelous collections of places that aren't developed, and if we can continue to be kind to them, maybe we'll always have them. So thank you. And